Hi there, my Why Religion friends. Welcome to another great episode of the podcast. I'm Anthony Sweat. As somebody with an artistic bent personally, I find complementary colors fascinating. Although they are found on opposite sides of the color wheel, they just go nicely together. Envision in your mind's eye right now the Los Angeles Lakers' purple and yellow uniforms, or the red and the green of Christmas decor, or the landscape of a southern Utah orange rock against a horizon of a deep blue sky. These complementary color combinations are just naturally pleasing to our eyes. Artists and designers understand this, and they know how to leverage the power of complementary colors. For example, when I paint, I can use them to bring harmonious contrast into an image, as one complementary color is usually cool, like a blue or a green, and the other is warm, like an orange or a red. Or if I want to paint a really nice shadow on a green pine tree, I add and mix in some dabs of red to my green. Oh, that's nice. That's going to make a happy little tree right there. If a certain color is maybe a little too loud on the canvas and I want to tone it down a little bit, I first look to add a bit of its complement and mix that in first. These paint colors are powerful together precisely because they're different. But paired together and utilized correctly, man, can they get the job done. The relationship of a mother and a father in a family are similar in many ways to the relationship of complementary colors in painting. Dr. Jenet Erickson of BYU's Department of Church History and Doctrine specializes in research related to the distinct but complementary contributions of mothers and fathers in child development and how both are needed in their unique and inherent approaches to parenting.
So it highlights these distinct contributions that are very real. Like when we look at the complementary nature of parenting, you'll see mothers do things differently than fathers do, and both are really important for development, and that they assist one another as equal partners. And equal partners is the supreme thing, right? You get these different kind of capacities or responsibilities are underneath that beautiful principle of equal partners.
In today's episode, we get into some of the research and principles, along with the practices about the complementary nature of mothers and fathers, and what the spring 2020 COVID pandemic reset may have illuminated about how best to harmonize and utilize these distinct complementary natures and roles. This is Why Religion.
Each year, religion professors at Brigham Young University produce hundreds of publications on subjects related to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This podcast brings this research into one place to enlighten the everyday seeker of truth.
Seek learning, even by study and also by faith.
Interviewing the author, we discuss why the study was done, why it matters, and why the professor chooses to be both a scholar and a disciple. This is Why Religion. Research to enlighten your mind.
Recently, Professor Jenet Erickson sat down with her church history and doctrine colleague, Professor Casey Griffiths, to talk about her research related to mothers and fathers' distinct and innate parenting approaches and desires. In part one of this interview, she's going to get into why she pursued and produced this research. Specifically, how COVID quarantines have helped impel us to reset and even rethink the possibilities of complementary parenting today. She'll also discuss what research shows that mothers with children at home want regarding work-home life balance, and also what fathers find most fulfilling, and what seems to produce the happiest dynamics at home. In part two, as usual, she'll move a little bit more towards application and why this research matters and can be applied in our modern families. And in part three, she'll tell us a little bit more about her own academic journey and faith. With that, I hope you're excited to listen to this great interview and the wonderful insights that Dr. Jenet Erickson will provide from her recent research.
Jenet, thank you for being here with us today. And we're going to be discussing your article. It's published by the Institute for Family Studies, and it is called Homeward Bound, The Work-Family Reset in Post-COVID America. So this is very, very topical, especially with what's been going on the last couple of months and all the changes that the pandemic has brought to our society. Give us a little bit of background about why you wrote on this and what the study said.
Yes. It's so interesting to have this event that's global and that it really did change the work-family landscape. And when we talk about that, the whole idea that people came home was something that who would have ever envisioned? So 15 years ago, I was looking at some data about women's preferences around work. And 30% of them said they would like to work for pay from home. This is mothers with children under 18. But nobody did it. It was 1% who did it. So enter COVID, and you have this massive, this homeward bound, massive movement into the home where work is happening and people are being paid for work from home. And they liked it. So what we did with this study, the Wheatley Institution teamed up with the Institute for Family Studies, both of which are, Institute for Family Studies is a commentary on policy think tank, really good writing, and it's all grounded in research around family topics. And then the Wheatley Institution has a focus on core institutions for their efforts. And of course, the core institution of the family would be central to that. So they help fund data collection and then publication around issues that way. So in this piece, we just wanted to look at, well, what happened with COVID? Like, because you'd hear things like, this has been so hard for mothers to come home with children at home. And certainly, right, that burden of educating children and all the complexities of that when they're home from school. And the question was, what did men think? Like, they had, many of them came home. Are they trying to burst out of the house and get back into the office, right? Or how do they see this? And so this data we needed to figure out what happened with people's feelings around this. And what we found is, it really was a reset. And the reason I say reset is it gave people an opportunity that they had never had before to be home and as a couple, in a sense, navigate childcare together.
I'm guessing at this point, everybody wants to jump in with their pandemic story.
Yes, totally.
Of what happened, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I mean, I normally teach classes at a university. For a year and a half, I was teaching over Zoom from my
home.
basement. And in some ways, it was difficult. I couldn't see all my students or know how they were reacting. In other ways, it was amazing. I was jumping on the trampoline with my two little girls.
In the middle of the day, probably. Casey, right? Like, here I go.
Until 5 minutes before class.
Yes.
Then I run in and teach.
Yes.
There were moments when I was teaching a class and my wife wandered into my office and I just pulled her and she sat down and answered a question.
Wow.
In that sense, it was great. But I'm guessing for a lot of people, it changed priorities or maybe pushed us to look at things differently than how we've been looking at them.
Yes. So because just recently, prior to the pandemic, there had been this understanding about what we call workism, especially among educated, where they really see work, their professional work, as an identity. It's seen as meaningful to their life. It's kind of essential to my life mission, like my life efforts. And lower income do not identify as much with work. But what it meant is it was in contradiction to kind of a familistic orientation, which would say what matters most in my life is the quality of my relationships. And so they were kind of competing. And I think what happened with coming home is there was this, I like this. I like being able to spend time with my kids out on the trampoline before I go in and teach. I like that we are together more. And it really, when we think about good things for family, COVID kind of presented. Now, this wasn't everybody, right? But it provided opportunities for being together that had not been happening in this kind of fragmentation of family busyness. And so what happens is we look at these findings is men really liked being home. In fact, college-educated men, it's like 65% said they would prefer to work from home either half or most of the time. Mm-hmm. And women were similar, not unlike what I had expected based on what I had found 15 years before with that 30% wanting to be at home. And I think what it did is it just gave people this opportunity. We can work together to care for our children because we also asked, how do you see caregiving options? What about daycare? Because what had happened in COVID during this period with daycares is like nobody's going to daycare. And so there was this fear that everything, right, we had destroyed the daycare industry, right? And we're going to rebuild this, which politically that's kind of been the impetus for policies under the Biden administration. But what this finding showed is that people aren't actually interested. That would be like, it's like 11% of parents with children under 5 want to send them to daycare, meaning want to send them to the care of someone outside that family. And most of them see as ideal some way to navigate this together, to care for our children together, with you at home and me at home. We're both doing some work, even if she's prioritizing some way of interacting with those children differently than he is. There was this sense of we can do this together. And I actually think that's what women have wanted a long time, but haven't known how to make that possible.
It feels like in a lot of ways, the pandemic caused everybody to just slow down.
Yes.
Take a breath.
Yes.
And while we were taking that breather, we started to realize maybe our priorities have been a little out of whack, and we need to refocus and change.
Yes. Casey, I think that's exactly what happened. And it's interesting that there's this long study that you'll hear people reference because it's super incredible. It was 75 years taking Harvard's one class in Harvard in the 1930s and tracking them for 75 years. It's the longest longitudinal study that we have. Massive investment. They looked at every feature. It was only men because it was only men at that time that were at Harvard. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at every aspect of their lives. At the end of that 75 years, the study who ends it, right? The study beginner was not alive, but the one who ends it.
A multi-generational study.
Yes. This project, this PI, he just said, what is the culmination message of this? Love is happiness, full stop. And all this data had shown the power of relationships in people's well-being and happiness. So nurturing relationships with mother and father as a young child predicted more income across life. It predicted more stable relationships. Those stable relationships in adulthood predicted happiness and well-being. So he just said, what this whole thing shows us is that really happiness is relationships. So it kind of upends that workist orientation, right? Not that we can't find really meaningful contributions in our communities and other things through our work, but that in terms of well-being, there is a priority that matters most. And it's the quality of those relationships. And I think that's what people experienced right at home. I can do things differently when I'm home. So the data comes on after like decades of looking at women and their work preferences. Mm-hmm. And I think as I'm coming into this field, it was natural to assume if women were given the choice, if educational and occupational opportunities were open, right? You could hear these messages that would say, women are going to choose the path of greatest freedom and opportunity and development, and they're going to choose full-time employment, right? They finally can.
That's the stereotype, right?
Yes.
And it feels like all of our metrics for success are based around that idea.
Yes.
How much money do you make?
Yes.
What position do you have?
Yes.
When those don't necessarily line up with what our priorities are, especially women.
Yes. So there was kind of that assumption culturally, like that's what women are going to do. And yet as we track it, women, and there was a big uptick in women's employment during the 70s and the 80s. But then it's just kind of tapered off. And it doesn't matter what survey you're looking at, women with children at home do not tend to prefer full-time employment. Some do. Mm. But you get this big, huge group in the middle. You'll have the group that want to be home that are like the 25% absolutely want to be home, not doing any professional work. You got the same on the other side, this 25% probably that want to be professionally involved full-time. And this huge chunk in the middle that want to be able to prioritize care of their children. And so they will either choose part-time or at home for that chunk of that child's development, that period in their development. Mm. And so we just seen that over and over and over again. That comes out in the data. Some people have kind of said, there's this stalled revolution, right? Like we had this revolution of women coming to break glass ceilings, to make significant contributions, and to be equal with men in the workforce. And it just, what's happened? And I think what's happening is that mothers have a sense for how significant their contributions are to children's development. And they have a sense for their capacity to do that that's different even than fathers, even though fathers matter as much. The contributions are distinct. And so they want to be able to prioritize care of those children, particularly during those early periods of their lives. So when when people get married, what typically happens is she will back off from employment and he will increase in employment. It's not what they think they're going to do before they get married and have children. When they get married and have children, there's this like she's honing in on a particular, the well-being of these children, and he tends to hone in on providing more. And you just see that naturally happen. It's interesting in the happiness measures that you'll see that the dynamic that seems to be most facilitative, and this is not everybody. That's what I think is the powerful principle, is that, that we decide this together, right? But you'll see this breadwinner model that isn't exactly like it was in the 1950s or the 1960s. So we'll call it neo-traditional. Like it's a neo-traditional model where fathers are doing more caregiving, they're doing more housework, they're doing more of that. But there is still the sense that he's the primary breadwinner. She's doing more professional work. She's doing a more equal share of that caregiving at home, but she's still prioritizing caregiving. And that those are the happiest, like that's a really happy, it tends to be one of the happier dynamics.
Now, you and I both teach a class at BYU called The Eternal Family.
Yes.
And this class is just a fascinating look into the minds of the up-and-coming generation and how they perceive these. And before we started this interview, we were chatting about how, in the past, there's been a stereotype in the church maybe against women that choose to work outside the home.
Yes.
But now we're almost seeing a swing the opposite direction where a lot of the young women in our classes will say things like, well, I'm just going to be a mom.
Yes.
Like that's some sort of compromise, or make it sound like they're settling if they choose not to have a career and instead choose to prioritize motherhood.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your observations there.
Yes. I think women, and this is not just here at BYU, but it's interesting that you'll hear people talk about the shame women feel around maternal desire. Like they should feel guilty for wanting to care for children and prioritize that care. But this is what I'll tell them. In the last 10 years, I grew up in my early years at BYU and then graduate school hearing a lot about attachment theory, which was started in the 1940s. John Bowlby, he's able to see that there's something about a continuous relationship with a primary caregiver, mother typically, that allows for development to happen, and it's important. And when it's disrupted, it can disrupt development. So we came to understand attachment matters. Mothers primarily tend to be that primary caregiver, and their relationship matters. Well, in the last 10 years, we've been able to watch brain development because we have neurobiological technology that allows us to literally see what's happening inside the brain. And so these assumed theories are being tested by what you can actually observe in the brain. And what we can see now is when that baby first, even the last trimester, there's parts of the brain that have been developed in the right side especially, that's the primary emotional side of the brain. It's not the language side. It's the sense of feelings, communication through feelings. It's meaning. It's who I am as a person. That side of the brain, and all the parts are in place. But when they come out of the womb, you have this incredible. I mean, it is the brain doubles in size in that area of the brain. When we say double, it's not like growing, bigger than the skull, but it's all these synapses are being formed. You'll have 40,000 per second synapses being formed, these connections. And it's the connections among these parts of the brain that determine kind of emotional awareness, emotional understanding, moral sense, identity, personality. And that process can only happen within a relationship. So that baby comes out looking for someone. They're looking for someone to connect with and establish a relationship with. And so they sense smell, they hear voice. And of course, who are they primed to look for? Mother. They know her heartbeat, they know her voice, they know her. And she is at the same time, through hormonal oxytocin and other hormonal processes, is primed to connect with that baby. That baby's face is the most beautiful thing to her in the world. And we actually know that like the proportions of the baby's eyes and the face and the head, it's attractive in a special way to her. And that baby similarly is primed, more brain space to look at a woman's face than anything else. And they're particularly primed for this mother. And so in that first year and a half, her right brain is literally building the right brain connections of that infant. And we can watch it. We can see how powerful her responsiveness, and this does not take a PhD. This is the most, it's incredible the women's intuition about providing the right amount of stimulation. They respond to emotion, not just sad emotions, but happy emotions. They coo, they cuddle, they touch in ways that are just literally, we can watch those synapses forming as this brain is developing. And then by about 18 to 24 months, dad steps in as being very important. And his relationship, which is equally important, but at a different time, is impacting the development of that brain too. Only now we're engaging in the left side. That development starts to really take off in the left side of the brain as fathers and their relationship with that baby become really important. This is just to say that I think women have a sense for how significant her nurturing influence is on the development of young life. And it is. That first 4 years of life are very significant in laying the foundation for growth. And it's not because she's perfect. I mean, we'll say 70% of the time you misinterpret the cue of that infant and you repair. So it's not women that are like perfectly interpreting and perfectly responding. No, but it's in that relationship with all those misattunements and reparations that this powerful process of development is happening. So babies and moms have a really special work going on. And I think they have a sense of that. And it's why they would say, I have to prioritize this. I'll never forget when there's one Atlantic piece that has been shared more broadly than any other Atlantic piece in the history of the Atlantic, which is saying a whole lot. And it's written by Anne Marie Slaughter, who worked with the State Department under Hillary Clinton when she was the State Department, and it was a really meaningful job for Anne Marie Slaughter. She'd been dean at Princeton. She left that position, just spent the week in New York, and then would come home to her family on the weekends. And at some point in this process, she has two sons who were both adolescents. One of them starts to struggle. She leaves her State Department position so that she can be home with him more. And when she did, it shook the world, because this is a woman who had gone around preaching so much the need for women in these positions, the power that women had, and men to take more lead in caregiving. And she just says this, she'll say, when I made that choice, it was reflexive, meaning I could not do otherwise. Even though her husband could be home with that child a lot, he was a professor at Princeton, had a pretty flexible job. It wasn't that the child wasn't getting parental influence. She just knew, I can do something no one else can do, and it matters so much. So she just kicked off this conversation about choices around work and family, supporting people in making family more of a priority, and how much we need that. She'll say, men and women, this is just quoting her, men and women respond quite differently when problems at home arise. I do not believe fathers love their children any less than mothers do. But men do seem more likely to choose their job at a cost to their family, while women tend to choose their family at a cost to their job. And she's not critical of it. She says we have to honor this and also encourage more conversations where men feel comfortable prioritizing their family more. They're not ashamed, right, about bringing up family needs and saying, I've got to leave this to go be with this child or go do this kind of thing.
That was actually one of the most fascinating parts of this study was 31% of men said they preferred to work from home most of the time.
Yeah.
22% half the time. Only 38% from the office most of the time.
Isn't that amazing, Casey?
So what are the implications for fathers when it comes to this data and how the pandemic's caused a reset in the way we look at our priorities?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a little nuance here in that, more than half of men, and among college-educated men, it's even higher. It's like 65% more than, and that's what they want. Now, when we talked about caregiving for children, what was interesting is that women were more likely to say the ideal is to share caregiving with both of us working from home. So she has this view of, since you're home and I'm home, we can both do professional work and share this caregiving responsibility. Men were not as likely to see that as the ideal, which I think is a reflection of what people comment on, women kind of coming further along in this idea of sharing those responsibilities, maybe coming a little further along, a little faster than men have. But I think what it captures is that women, they want to be able to prioritize care of their children. They know that the best place for that is at home, that those children are cared for by those parents. And they also want professional opportunities without having to put their children in care outside that family.
If you're interested in more peer-reviewed, high-quality gospel scholarship about Latter-day Saint history, doctrine, or practice, such as this publication, BYU's Religious Studies Center is a great place to check out. As you jump into your personal and family study of the history and teachings of the Old Testament this year, with the church's Come Follow Me emphasis, there's a new book just published by the RSC called Joseph Smith's Translation of the Bible, the Joseph Smith translation and the King James translation in parallel columns, edited by Kent Jackson, an emeritus BYU religion professor and Joseph Smith history translation scholar. Some don't know that Joseph Smith made changes to over 3,400 verses in the Bible, but that only about 1/3 of those changes appear in the footnotes and endnotes of our current Latter-day Saint printed edition of the Bible. This publication brings you the complete text of the Bible revision made by Joseph Smith, presented with modern punctuation and spelling, and with the original chapter and verse divisions created by Joseph Smith and his scribes, published in parallel columns with corresponding verses of the King James Bible. It's a fascinating way to study side by side and see all the changes that the prophet Joseph Smith made in his inspired Bible translation. Again, the book is called Joseph Smith's Translation of the Bible, the Joseph Smith translation, and the King James translation in parallel columns. Check it out and pick it up at rsc.byu.edu. We've been listening to a great interview with Dr. Jenet Erickson from BYU's Department of Church History and Doctrine, discussing her research on Homeward Bound, the Work-Family Reset in Post-COVID America. In part 2, we like to push the discussion a little bit more toward direct application, talking about why this research matters. In this part, Dr. Erickson discusses the societal pressures that some women face to be a working mother, a new model for families, or what she calls the neo-family, and what modern parenting may look like as mothers and fathers labor as co-equals and complements to meet their child's needs.
Let's talk about how this might apply in people's lives. I loved earlier how you said this isn't going back to the 1950s,
Yes,
right? Where
yes.
dad goes to work and mom is at home vacuuming in a pressed blouse with pearls on and things like
Yes.
that. This is what you would call neo-traditional.
Yes.
So what would be the new model for families that we could take from some of this data that we're working with here?
Yes. First of all, I think the principle is that they are deciding that together, that it's not an assumed role. And so I love when women students get a sense for the power that motherhood can be, and they're choosing it. Not that it's expected, not that it's easier just to go be dependent on a man to provide for you, right? To just take on that role because that can be secure and safe, but that you are literally choosing together this with a respect for and appreciation for the power that she can be in that early period. And also that he is important too, right? And so I think what it looks like is that there will be a prioritization that happens. She may likely want to do professional work, and it's really important for her to develop. It may facilitate her being a better mother, right? Feel like she's more efficacious there. But she's going to want to prioritize that, meaning she'll scale back from work to a part-time or no work during periods of that child's development. And men, at the same time, are stepping up their involvement doing dishes and caring and caregiving and right. And so there's this sense of we are doing this family together, even though I'm prioritizing because I'm aware of what my unique capacities are here. I'm prioritizing it a little bit differently than you are during particular periods of children's development.
This is what the family proclamation would describe as an equal partner relationship.
Think, yes. And it's so powerful, right? Because it'll say fathers are responsible to preside, provide, and protect. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture. So it highlights these distinct contributions that are very real. Like when we look at the complementary nature of parenting, you'll see mothers do things differently than fathers do, and both are really important for development. And we can talk about that. That's a really powerful topic. But then you have this and that they assist one another as equal partners. And equal partners is the supreme thing, right? You get these different kind of capacities or responsibilities are underneath that beautiful principle of equal partners.
Yeah. The mistake people sometimes make is they read the role of fathers and the role of mothers
Yes.
in the proclamation,
Yes.
and then they don't read the next line,
Yes.
which says they are to assist each other as equal partners in fulfilling these responsibilities.
Yes.
That might mean that there's a lot of give and take when it comes to the provide, protect, preside,
Yes.
and the nurturing of children, and that these are two circles that overlap to a fairly large degree.
Yes. And that we're really working it out together. We're deciding that together. And also not to diminish like the remarkable, unique capacities of men and women, like what they bring. For example, we know that just by his presence, a father's, his size, his voice, he brings a sense of order to that family that is special. She brings this sense of nurturing, an emotional attunement, an awareness that's special to her. And they both work together. So you'll see, I mean, just from the very beginning, we'll talk about how men tend to tickle and toss babies and women coo and cuddle. And it's the same hormone, it's oxytocin, that comes into that brain for both of them as they're doing this bonding process, and it elicits different behaviors. And all the way across development, you'll see this beautiful complementarity. So you'll see mothers, for example, mothers will take a ball, they'll describe the ball, it's red, to this baby, right? And talk about it, and they'll show them how it works. Dad takes the ball and bops the kid on the head with it, right? and so we'll see men have this kind of stimulatory influence, like they really impact how that child develops an engagement with the outside world, how they understand boundaries, how they understand rules. So fathers have a big impact on sexual trajectory for girls, their decisions around sexuality, how they interface with men in the future. Father's presence impacts how boys, like the likelihood of incarceration rates for young men. And fathers are the most important predictor of college graduation rates. So you'll see his presence impacts how they relate to the outside world in very powerful ways. She impacts core, their understanding of themselves, their emotional, and we don't even have words to describe how incredible this complementarity is in both of them impacting the developmental domains of children, whether it's cognitive, social, physical, emotional, spiritual, both impact them. But they do it in distinct ways that are very complementary, and a child needs both. They benefit from both. You'll see dads, like you'll have a mom and dad together helping a child with a project, right? And she steps in and says, remember how to do this, remember how to do this. And he'll stand back and say, you can do it. I know you can do it. And you'll see men kind of fostering independence and a sense of risk-taking, and I'll be here to help you. And women doing this very facilitative, I'm going to guide you through this whole process so you can develop these skills and step in and help. And both are core to nurturing. Like you've got this like holding on and letting go. And
I feel like you've just described exactly how me and my wife parent.
Right?
My wife is I'll hold your hand while you do this. And I'm like well, if they fall off, they fall off. They're going to learn an important thing.
And it's really typical, Casey. And no one teaches you that, right? Like you just intuitively bring to parenting these complementary gifts. And the important thing is both are really essential. It's not like one doesn't matter more than the other. I'll never forget, my husband has no siblings. He's an only child and never was around babies ever, ever, ever. And within that first day of bringing her home, our daughter, he's doing calisthenics with her. And I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Like throwing her up and doing this kind of thing. And the same thing, when he would hold her, I would pull her in like to my core, and he would always face her out like a football hold. He'd never seen that before. That's what men do. And it's emblematic of how they impact development because that baby is looking at the outside world. It's like that dad has a sense for, I want you to see what I see. And she holds, protects, right, in her beautiful way, nurtures core. And he's impacting how that child is going to relate to the outside world, interface with the outside world, understand boundaries. She's much more likely to interrupt and correct around behaviors. Women are much more likely to kind of discipline more consistently, more frequently. He does less consistently, less frequently, but when he does, there's no negotiation. It's like, you know what we are expected, you know what the consequence is. And both really are important. Like a child needs to develop that negotiation capacity and see mom as a negotiator and experience dad as there is a set boundary. You don't get past this boundary, right, without consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really beautiful thing to see this complementarity. And I think that work-family reset, it appreciates that both matter in the development of children.
Now, in further discussing this work-family reset, I should say my wife works outside the home.
Yes.
Not because we need the money necessarily. I'm a religion teacher, which is a really lucrative profession.
As we all know,
I
right?
say sarcastically. And yet she felt like she needed to express herself artistically. You know,
Yes.
she's a lighting designer. She's really
Wow.
gifted. That was, I think, part of that angle there too. And if I'm being honest, she works nights when she's working on a play. I value that time when I get a
With the
chance to
children, yes.
spend time with my kids, take them out for pizza, fall asleep with my 3-year-old lying
Yeah.
next to me.
Yeah.
Because it feels like if she's there, you know, they're going to her.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now, yes. Now you get them to yourself
Yeah.
in a special way. I love that. It's interesting. We'll talk about equality. It matters so much, right? It just matters so much, that decision-making and valuing one another. But interesting, the data that getting up from dinner, dad comes over, maybe he's just come home from work. He comes over to start doing the dishes, right? Trying to help. And that mother's saying, go play with the kids. I can do the dishes. And what you get the sense for is she cares so much. And we see this over and over again. She knows that dad's relationship with those children is very important. And it's different than her relationship with them. And it gives them something she cannot give. And so she cares about, right? She cares about nurturing them. No question. She realizes part of that nurturing is enabling or protecting or encouraging that relationship between father and child that provides something I can't give. And certainly men have that sense, right, of what women do. I can't do what she can do for these children.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And so both really, really matter. And I think that appreciation that she has for your relationship, women care a lot about the quality of the relationship between husband and children. It matters a lot to them because they worry about those children and they know that dads do something they can't do. Even more than like 50-50 on the housework, right? It's like, I need you, right? That relationship is really important.
If you're interested in reading Dr. Erickson and her colleagues' research on Homeward Bound, the Work-Family Reset in Post-COVID America, published by the Institute for Family Studies, go to our website at whyreligion.byu.edu, where you can find a link to the full research report and also a link to an executive summary of the key research findings. Again, that's whyreligion.byu.edu. There, you can also read about Professor Erickson, as well as get access to links of articles from past episodes. And while I have you, if you're loving what you're getting from Why Religion, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on your podcast platform, as it helps others who may not know about the podcast be able to find us and learn and access this great content. Well, we've arrived at our final segment of this Why Religion episode, where we like to talk a little bit about the professor's academic journey that brought them here to BYU and about their own personal faith. So here is Dr. Jenet Erickson wrapping up this episode as she speaks to these topics.
In the last few minutes, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about you and your journey. You came to religious education from the School of Family Life. You also worked for the Wheatley Institution. Tell us a little bit about your journey in academia, and you've mentioned in this that you're also a wife and mother, and how you balance all those priorities together.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. These are like the questions of life, right? I taught in the School of Family Life. I got my PhD from the University of Minnesota. I came and taught at BYU. I was not married. And the third year that I was there, met my husband. It was a miracle. We were both 34, got married, and we were blessed to be able to have our Ladon soon after that. And I knew I couldn't, there are women who can. I couldn't maintain my full-time professional work and do what I needed to do with her. and we were blessed with another child. So I quit my full-time position, and then I became a fellow of the Wheatley Institution, where I would do presentations and just help with research throughout the year, not as intense as having a full-time position, and also wrote for the Deseret News on family issues as a columnist. And that was a really wonderful mix for me. And I homeschooled them, and I think they got way too much of me. I thought, oh, I'll have a big family, and we were only sent two. So I navigated those questions of infertility, and what it just led to is when they have gone to school, then I felt like I need to be back teaching and felt a call there. And so I taught for the School of Family Life part-time again, and also started teaching the Eternal Family class, which is, when I was a student, we didn't have this class. And Casey, just to be honest, it covers everything significant about family life in the most incredible way, right? It is very challenging to teach, I think, and so beautiful and so important. And so I've loved teaching it, and also felt very stretched doing that. And in that process, applied and became a full-time professor again, this time in religious education. And then I continue teaching for the School of Family Life as well.
I teach the Eternal Family class too. And when they initially asked me to teach it, and they said the curriculum is the Family Proclamation, I'm saying, well, I usually teach the Doctrine and Covenants of the book. I'm used to having 500 pages of material.
Yes.
You want me to spend an entire semester on one page?
Yeah, 9 paragraphs.
Yeah,
yes.
9 paragraphs. And then after the first semester I taught it, I remember thinking, it's crazy that we haven't been teaching this. Like, this is the core of what a person needs to know to be happy and connected and successful in life.
Yes. Oh, isn't that so powerful? And that it is the plan of salvation. I mean, it is the purpose for the fall. It is the purpose for the atonement. It is the purpose for creation, right? That deep understanding of family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I loved my foundations, history classes, all that stuff. But I stand up in front of my family classes and say, the real subject of this class is how to be a good human.
Yes.
Whether you're married, whether you're single, whatever your background is, this is about connection between you, God, and your brothers and sisters here on earth.
I love that, Casey. I had to figure that out being single for a long time, right? Like, if marriage matters so much, right, then can I grow and develop outside of marriage? And just that whole reality that this is all about developing the capacity for intimacy in its fullest form, like our heavenly parents have. And that's becoming a Christ-like person. That's a person, right, who's been changed by the Savior. And so whether you're married or not, you are working on that, right? And that's the key to that, to being able to have the kind of marriage, to being the kind of mother, to being the kind of wife, right, that we desire to be. And I love that. Just focus on the quality of our relationships, our capacity to have those kind of relationships.
Now, in our closing moments, this is difficult. Another thing about the family class is that I tell the class, everything's going to hit home every day.
Yeah.
It's difficult for church members to find resources sometimes to understand this. Things like this article are really, really helpful. And you're well connected into this network. What are some resources, some sites, some places people can go to learn a little bit more about the type of practices that lead to happiness in personal and family life?
Yes, I love that question. From kind of academic standpoint, there's a couple of websites that are just really good. So the Institute for Family Studies just is very research grounded in helping us understand all the dimensions of family life. And it's important for informing policy. So that's kind of the audience. Wheatley Institution has many recorded lectures. It has a podcast series as well of just incredible scholars talking about these issues. And they're kind of high level, meaning they might not focus as much on your interpersonal skills, your interpersonal, right, vulnerability and all of those things. And I feel like that's where we get, there's wonderful podcasts that are available that help people, I think through, right, how do I relate? How do I relate to myself? How do I relate to other human beings that are as important as those high level questions, right, about family structure and all of those other things. So we live at a time when the availability for wonderful, helpful information is just amazing, that you can access all over the place, right, wherever you are. So I love those two sites. I always check Institute for Family Studies. I love what Wheatley produces. And then we'll all have kind of different people that we follow that are helpful in our different needs, for our family needs that have to do with more of those interpersonal relationship capacities.
Very good. Well, Jenet, I think we've reached the end of my list. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap things up
It's
here?
been so fun to be here, Casey. Just a gift to talk about family and how much it matters. And I could just end with the proclamation has become a real gift to me. I know we can feel like it's a weapon sometimes or weaponize it, use it that way to say you fall outside this ideal. And I've just been so grateful to feel the light that it is and to use it as a light, and that we all fall outside the ideal, right? Whatever we think of as the ideal. And so we have that beautiful Living Christ document that should be right alongside the Family Proclamation, that the Redeemer's whole work is to enable us to be the kind of people, to change us into the kind of people that can have unspeakable and profound joy in relationships eternally. And that's our destiny with Him. So I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you for listening to Why Religion. This podcast is a production of religious education at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. My name is Anthony Sweat, the host and producer. The Why Religion podcast team also includes from BYU Religious Education Professors Brad Wilcox, Casey Griffiths, Ryan Sharp, and Hank Smith. Recording, mixing, and original music was done by BYU student Mitchell Bashford. Say hi, Mitchell.
Hey, guys.
Original music and scoring for Why Religion podcast was also created by the fabulous BYU student musicians Grant Cagle,
Sam Clausen,
Colette Jones,
and Alistair Scheuermann.
If you enjoy what you've heard, please like and subscribe to Why Religion on wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. It really helps. And join us next time as we continue to bring the everyday Latter-day Saint fascinating gospel studies done by Brigham Young University religion professors to enlighten your mind and strengthen your faith.